Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Influential Oregonian, where we have discussions on Oregon history and academics and interview important people who have made history within or in the name of the Beaver State. I'm your host, Marcus Axford from the show Welcome to Oregon, joined by my boon companions, archaeologist and Marquis of Salem, David Winkler, and Finn J.D. John of Offbeat Oregon and Baron of Corvallis. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you, Marcus.
Great to be here.
Yeah, this week we don't have anything too special going on. Everyone has been busy with work and projects, so we will be doing another Stories from the State episode. We're going to be continuing where we left off with Finn pretty much uh, taking up the rest of the episode with his story. Um,
I'm gonna
and
learn so much today. I can't wait.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, real quick, I realized that I should have titled the last stories from the state a little bit better, because otherwise people are just going to keep saying seeing one, two, three, and they're not
hmm
going to understand what they're actually listening to. So I titled the last one just now, Witches and Chinese Funerary History, and this one is going to be Opium and Pearl Harbor. So
What do these two things have in common? About to find out.
More than you would think.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're doing an odd recording time. We're recording this at 7 in the evening. So like if you hear people in my background, that'd be why. Usually we do this in the morning so everybody's asleep or low key.
But
Uh,
Marcus, you're in a cabin in the middle of the woods. What are you talking about?
all right,
Is that
my
just the witch in the woods that you rent from?
more like the cabin in the middle of my garage. Okay, so before we get into the meat and potatoes of the show, next weekend there will be no episode. With it being the 4th of July weekend, I just want to try to give everyone the weekend off, with nobody having to worry about anything except for their own stuff, their own plans, and what have you. Uh, I'm going to try to keep on schedule for WTO and write and release episode 51 next weekend, which is on secret passages, tunnels, and the like.
Ooh.
I don't know what everyone always asks me, what pulls you to do a story? And I have multiple answers, and this was one of them where I just kind of started thinking about it and I know I need to do things like, Native American lore and Chinese history, and those are really big topics that I'm trying to be ready for, and I guess I just don't feel quite ready yet. So this was one that I knew I was going to have a lot to say and a lot of I knew it was going to be a really fun episode. Not that episodes aren't fun to do, it's just some are more fun and intriguing than others. So I'm currently writing the opening for it. The Hoosac Tunnel is my framing narrative, which, if for those of you who don't know, is a tunnel in Virginia that is also known as the Bloody Pit. And
Oh my.
yeah, if you don't know the history, you're gonna learn all about it here.
That's what I called my hemorrhoid.
Oh no! And this is why I labeled the show not safe for kids.
Oh boy.
Actually, I do it because otherwise people can't comment. If
Yeah.
you say that it's made for kids on YouTube, I had that mistake the first episode that we did. I'm like, why can't anybody comment? And then I actually had to
Mm,
look it up, and they said, well, if you're, I'm like, okay, well, whatever.
yeah.
So, anyway, WTO Live, which is, I think that is going to be the official title for the new project, which is Welcome to Oregon, kind of remastered, put onto YouTube and all that. Um, Wanted to do it for the 2 year, but obviously, again, we all got busy and it's slightly delayed. I want to make sure it's not perfect, but that all the pieces are there. Because when I do a project, I like to try to do it as right as I can from the get-go, which is, kind of common sense. But at this point in my life, I should know by now and learn, or I should know better, what I need and what I can leave room for to kind of grow off of. So you all can, well, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can all see my eerie spooky light and the room is dark. I'm kind of experimenting right now with that because that's going to be kind of the tone for WTO Live, and I'm really, really excited. I'm going to be doing the background sound campfire. I'm not going to do the whole different background sounds with every episode, like I do with the normal podcast, because the whole point of that is to trick the listener into thinking that, you're finding me in a different place. Well, hi, you already know you're not in a different place.
We need to figure out how to get some like Sasquatch audio type stuff so it sounds like, your cabin is besieged.
Oh,
Oh
I
my
can
God,
make
that'd be
some.
great.
I can smack a tree with
Yeah.
a stick.
There you go. Yeah.
Why do we have to pay for audio assets?
Oh.
That, that was really good. We
Thank
need
you.
to sample that.
Hey, buddy, you want to go light up?
Oh my God. Smokey the Bear says no.
One man cub. Oh,
Oh my goodness. So yeah, we'll be I'm hopefully gonna get that done soon. I'm hoping. It's been hard to find time to do it. Also because I personally have no video editing software. I need to make sure it's like all done in one take, and it's gonna be raw, like I said, unedited. So it's also going to be kind of a, commentary thing too. Like I'm not going to do my character intro in the front and the back. It's not going to make any sense. So I'm just going to be like, "Hey guys, we're back to where we started again. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the episode in the beginning and what I thought of when I first started doing it. And this will be for each episode because I tried doing that kind of stuff for Patreon, but it almost felt kind of like I was obligated to do the Patreon stuff, which I know it would be nice to have Patreon content, but it's really difficult to do. And we always want to try to make sure, education is readily available for everybody anyway, and not hidden behind a paywall, even if that paywall is only $1. Uh, so yeah, we'll be getting back to more formal interviews after the 4th of July, starting with Gus Frederick.
oh, nice.
Is a Silverton historian and another big name in our community.
Yeah.
So I talked to him. Actually, I tried to get him on tonight. I just asked him out of curiosity because I'm like, I know this is so last minute, but just in case you don't have anything planned, you want to come on? He's like, unfortunately, I already have plans.
Yeah.
So I'm like, that's fine. We'll just get past the dang holiday, and then we can get back to business as usual. Because I know things have been weird. We started out with doing a lot of guestings, and then we did the stories from the state. We wandered off into doing the field trip project, and came back to do the episode to kind of rehash,
We're
iterate.
still on brand. It's all good.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I'm excited to talk to Gus, though. I haven't seen him in a while. I think the last time I saw him was in the high school pharmacy parking lot in Silverton. He had a giant armload of Homer Davenport Days posters and was handing them out.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, we went to
I'm
Silverton.
gonna need you to define both of those things.
Oh yeah,
What
high
is a
school pharmacy
school
is
pharmacy?
it's a store. It's an Ace Hardware store / Joann's / general purpose drugstore type place in Silverton. And
Okay.
I've never really seen another store like it. It's a really cool place, but yeah. So that's why I ran into Gus there because of course and Homer Davenport Days is the thing. Homer Davenport was the cartoonist from Silverton who became super famous for taking on the Tammany Hall and stuff like that in New York City. I hope I got that right. Gus will probably watch this and be like, "No, it was in San Francisco." But
Because you said high school pharmacy, and I was just imagining a pharmacy that only deals in ibuprofen and anxiety medication.
and maybe Adderall under the counter. HI-S. I think it's pronounced. I think it's spelled like a
school.
regular school.
Yeah.
There's no K's involved, but yeah, that's the.
Okay.
They took over Peterson's drugstore, which was the what basically that store was back in the Cretaceous when I was working for the newspaper in Silverton.
When Oregon was an inland sea and you were but a microbe.
That's right.
Yeah, because
We're dunking on the Washington Territory all the time. We were a state. Well, wait, we're still doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of Fourth of July and speaking of high school pharmacy, my we had one in Independence, and it's nothing like it used to be. Obviously for because my grandfather used to work in high school pharmacy back
Ah,
long time ago because he unfortunately passed away when I was 12 in 2002, I believe. But when I was a kid, yeah, he worked there for a long time. And it was one of those things where it was a very personal store, everybody knew everybody kind of thing. I mean, that was kind of the vibe for small town living anyway, but you know, uh this is back when, a lot of the cheap, firework, like the tanks or the spinners or all the little
Mm.
stuff was like 50 cents, if that, maybe a quarter. Yeah, God, I just dated myself.
Just describing that general store from Stranger Things.
So
yeah.
my grandfather had access to a lot of stock, so every 4th of July, he'd bring home like just a ton of fireworks stuff
Just
and
illicit fireworks to hand them to a 12-year-old.
not illicit. They're fine. They're fine. But uh it was no, it was really cool. Yeah, I we actually went to Silverton this past weekend. Whatever the date is. Well, sometimes it takes a while, I know, for these episodes to come out, so doing whatever. Um, but we went there, uh, and I think the store is called The Neighborhood. And I really wish I could remember his name, but he was part of the local ghost hunting team. And again, I can't remember I'm so tired. Can't remember the name of the ghost hunting thing. But basically, uh, he mentioned Gus Frederick, and I'm like, I know him. He's been on my friends list forever. So yeah, that's pretty exciting too. And oh yeah, like I said, we got both podcast episodes of the Jason Lee Project stuff up. I decided to go ahead and also do the field trip podcast, or do the field trip one on podcast because might as well. That way, if people don't want to are fine just listening to it, they can go to their favorite podcast platform and go pick it up. Uh, I'm going to be updating the WTO episode soon, meaning I'm going to be taking every single episode, quote, down and replacing them with more updated versions. Hopefully, raised audio ceiling a little bit. So, like, if you're in your car, it's not so quiet. Chopped off the end so I can do the dynamic advertising, just all the cool stuff to make everything flow a little bit better. And finally, I did something really fun this past Thursday. I went to go see Bruce Haney at his presentation in Aurora.
I'm
Mm.
super bummed that I had to miss that.
I was gonna say, I knew David couldn't, and what I was texting you. I'm like, "Are you gonna be able to make it?" And you're like,
I
"No."
was sweating in the middle of an agricultural field. I think this
Uh,
is the closest to the jungles of Vietnam that I'll ever get.
But it was really great. Aurora is a really cute place. Finn, you've done a story on the perfect utopia that they had when they settled in, and it's a really wonderful story. I can't wait to touch more on it. A lot of the original settlement buildings are still there, and it's the was it Old Aurora Colony Museum is where the
Mhm.
presentation was, and yeah, I got to meet Bruce finally, and
It's
uh.
also a town made up almost entirely of antique stores. So for those of you who are keen, Aurora is
and
a great destination.
can confirm also the Aurora Architectural Salvage place is
Mhm.
spectacular. But, bring a wheelbarrow of sovereigns. I mean, it's
Yeah.
really expensive.
Yeah, it's so funny you mentioned that because Bruce had mentioned both to me and during his presentation, like, yeah, my wife and I come in antique, and we run out of energy to antique before we run out of stores to go look at.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a real thing out there. So it was a really, really cool museum. Jess went with me. We got to walk around and see some really cool stuff, and it was so great to hang out with Bruce.
Mm.
I
Yeah,
did.
Bruce is a cool guy.
I know this is completely random, but I did not expect him to be my height. I'm 5'7". I'm kind of short for a dude. So if because like I imagined Bruce to be like 2 feet taller than me, as I do with everybody. So I'm like, yay! Another,
Another short gang.
another short game. Thank you. Because you see in the intro of the field trip video, I'm in the middle of the two of you. Which is why I even pointed out, yes, I know, I'm the short one. So yeah, and final thing on that before we move on to you, David, was I've been kind of stressing lately about like making sure I'm always engaging on social media with people and making sure content is always trying to roll out. Because I want to make sure everybody is succeeding and doing well. And I told Bruce this. I said, God, I've been especially lately just kind of anxious that I haven't been doing that as much. And he looked at me and he's because I even told him like I was 2 weeks late on the episode from a couple weeks ago for WTO. I was a week late on this last one. And he looked at me and he said, I know a lot of authors and we talk about this kind of stuff. And I am so impressed that you can like pump out these scripts as you do, because I write like 2,000 words in a month, and you're pumping out how many in every 2 weeks? And I'm like 4,000, 4 to 5,000. So it made me feel pretty good. So he said, dude, just the content's gonna come out when it's gonna come out, and I'm excited because we're all at a point with this. I'm at a point with this where we've got a lot of content out there. If you're waiting on the latest show, you've got 50 other episodes of WTO to go look at. You've got tons of offbeat Oregon history to go look at. Penny Dreadfuls, so much more. You've got a lot of stuff to do. So not that anybody's ever complained about it, but as we talked about, it's just that
Well, I
internal.
always I always offer anybody who complains about Offbeat Oregon a full money back refund. Every penny.
Reach in your pocket and plot some lint. Here you go.
Yeah, I've never monetized it. It's just always been, a fun thing. And then I sort of like it's parlayed over into the books that, of course, I do make some money from those, but not really enough to count.
Yeah. Alrighty. I know we've been chit-chatting for a while, but that's okay. There's a lot of stuff that had to get through, so I'm done. I was hoping to get through these real quick, but
All
never
right.
fails. All right, David, what's been going on with you? I will say I'm sad that you had to pull out of D&D. I totally
Yeah.
understand it. Work is long and tough, and
Yeah.
there's some really cool stuff that's coming your way in probably not the near future, but whatever that you
Yeah.
told us about that I'm not going to say on here because it's not my place. But I will say congratulations again, live
Thank you.
on air, whatever. You know what it is. Nobody else does. You'll know when it happens. But
Yep.
congratulations. You've worked so hard for it.
Thank you. Yeah, I just learned archaeologists typically work between 50 and 80 hours a week. So I just pulled a 51-hour week. And then I also just learned that I can't tell you where I went. I can't tell you who I worked for, and I can't tell you what I found. But I was thinking about it, and it's like some of the stuff that the reason for that is very practical. It's not like a you know it's not the ivory tower reason that people imagine that it might be. A lot of it just simply comes down to client confidentiality, and also like the nature of what we're finding is very interesting to people, and I love that. But unfortunately, a lot of folks, when it comes to interesting things,
They
they want
want
to
to
go.
own them,
Yes,
even
Mhm.
they
Yep.
illegally. Yeah.
yes, they want to
Which, of
go
course,
look.
why
Yeah.
nobody knows where Cow Cave is anymore.
Yes, exactly. And there's nothing wrong with being curious or wanting to go look. Um, the only trouble is a lot of folks, they want a souvenir, which I understand. Um, but I was thinking about like one of the folks I was volunteering with told me this story that at a conference, a person who was not an archaeologist came up to them and said, "You know, I used to find arrowheads all over the place as a kid, but you just don't really see them anymore." And what my friend
Gee.
came back with is, well, yeah, I mean, arrowheads are cool. And everybody usually picks one or two of them up as they find them. But when everyone and their cousin picks up one or two every time they find them, and nobody's really making arrowheads anymore, eventually that just kind of runs out. And so that is my message for the week. Just something for folks to kind of chew on, to think about. Certainly not trying to talk down to anybody or project myself as anything more than the shovel bum that I am.
I
No,
have never found an arrowhead.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm old enough to, I was, I was a kid during the time when, the Mystery of Skull Mountain, the Hardy Boys novel
Mm-hmm.
with the Native American burial ground
Yeah.
thing was still in the school library.
Mm-hmm.
And, the kids were bringing in Moala grade school, hey, look what I found this weekend.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's cool. But I've never actually found one.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was something I wanted to add to that, but it
Yeah.
slipped out of my head.
well,
So
I will say, nobody feel bad for picking something up and basically uh, dislodging it from the archaeological view. I have done that myself, and
yes,
I I beat myself up over it a lot.
don't
No, well, no,
don't.
well, yeah, not like I think about every single waking moment, of course,
Mm,
uh, because I know exactly what it was, and I kicking myself because I really wish I had. It might still be around here somewhere, but to
yeah.
my knowledge, I don't know where. It was a horseshoe.
Oh.
It was a horseshoe
Yeah.
from in front of what used to be an old blacksmith shop in Monmouth.
Mm-hmm.
When they were redoing Main Street, they dug it up. And
Mm,
we were walking around one night and I just happened to find it. And of course, to us, horseshoes are still a thing.
yeah.
So we don't think about in the context of history or, historical and
Right.
archaeological importance, but that would have been to the
Yes.
city. And as someone who is a member um, that has a position with the Monmouth Historical Commission, I feel like I've let my people
Yeah.
down.
Well, and that kind of reminds me of what I wanted to talk about a second ago. I got to talk to the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, and he and the Cultural Resources Director for the tribe started an initiative with grade school kids. Now, this is not, to my knowledge, a unique initiative, but it was one that the tribe found some success with. They called it "Take a Pick, Not a Point," and what that was is, if you see something out in the woods, yeah, it's really cool, and you want to have something to show to your friends. And thankfully, nowadays, we all have little cameras in our pockets. So, one great thing that you can do to have that memory and to share it with people, just snap a little picture of it and then cover over what you found. Because, like what we're alluding to, once it gets picked up, that we can't put it back where it was, and we lose. On one hand, we lose the chance to research it later, but also we lose the chance for someone else to come along and see it.
Yeah, I'm wondering if I mean it's a really broad thing. It's a worldwide thing that
Hmm.
this should be happening with. But focusing on our home here in Oregon, I'm wondering if there's something the Oregon Historical Society could do along the lines of make a hotline. If you
Yeah.
find something, call the hotline, tell them where you found it, take your picture, whatever, so they can come out to investigate it.
Yeah.
And, who knows, if you actually found something authentic, you get, a free pass to their museums or something like
Yeah.
that. Something to incentivize people to keep the history going,
Yeah.
Good
instead of
idea.
taking it home and putting it in a drawer somewhere.
It
Yeah.
belongs in a museum.
It does belong in a museum. I belong in a museum.
Yeah, the three of us, or three of us
In a
belong in
foreign
museums.
country, halfway around the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah. But you can come see it anytime in England.
I can't afford to go to England. I'll just look
Oh,
at the
that's
pictures
just your
online.
rotten luck.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you should get a better job.
Yeah.
Alrighty, well,
All
was
right.
that your thing for the week?
That is my thing for the week. Thank you for humoring me.
You're welcome. Finn?
Well, I think my thing for the week has got to be this. I discovered this. It's like a true crime magazine from 1825. And it's like all these little like article snippet things about horrible murders and crimes and things like that in faraway country, far away from London, where this thing was published in 1825. And so
But Finn,
I
why
was
true
very
crime now?
it's like all these little itty bitty nuggets, and I got very excited about it because I can use it to, when I've got an episode of the Penny Dreadful radio show, which comes in short or something like that, I can pad it out so that it's an actual hour using these. And I'm also working on expanding our stable of sponsors. The Penny Dreadful radio show is sponsored by organizations that may or may not actually exist, but would love to get money from you anyway. Preferably in the form of guineas. A guinea, of course, isn't like they did them all in the 1700s, and they're worth 21 shillings, which is basically a pound and a shilling. But yeah, I've just been doing that.
I need to write some of those because I heard you were taking requests, and I'm like, I should really sit down because I really loved playing Grand Theft Auto growing up and all the weird, funny parody stuff that they would do
Oh
in that.
yes,
Uh-huh.
Big Smoke's order. Oh, something like that. And a large soda. Oh
Yes.
yeah,
And the whole
yeah.
car's just looking at him, but yeah,
I was really pleased with the Honey Bunny one. You know, Honey, the scam thing that PayPal runs that steals. It's basically a cookie stuffing operation, but it's legal because they're a large, wealthy corporation and not, just a random guy like Brian Dunning from the Skeptoid podcast, who actually served a year in jail for doing what Honey did. It's called cookie stuffing. But yeah, I mean, so Honey was kind of in the news quite a bit. It was a browser extension that you would load up, and it would supposedly scour the internet for discount codes for you before you checked out. But what it really would do is substitute their referral code for whatever referral code was on tap, and so that they would get a commission, whatever commission that was supposed to be due to the website that you came from would go to them. But yeah, I came up with a script for Honey Bunny, which is a service which scans the internet for discount codes, then opens a portal to another dimension through which a cute blonde in a short skirt with a 38 snub nose jumps up on a table and helps you negotiate a discount on the spot.
oh my God, that's great.
So,
It's just me and Marcus in a wig, though.
yeah.
Hello there, Hanson.
Well, that was of course the famous scene from Pulp Fiction where Honey Bunny and Pumpkin are talking at the table, and then all of a sudden they jump up and try to rob the coffee shop, and unfortunately the two hitman guys are having lunch.
I
So,
should do like Jack's chainsaws, rip through the trees of Whitehall or Whitechapel.
yeah.
Oh, God.
I feel like I'm wandering off topic a little bit here, though, so I should probably yield the floor.
To yourself?
Oh, am I up next? All right, it's
I'm the one telling the story about Opium and Pearl
Oh,
Harbor.
yes, okay. So are you ready for me to kick that off?
Yes, yes, I am.
So, okay, so here's the thing. From time to time, somebody asks me what my favorite offbeat Oregon story is. I mean, the one that I would make a movie out of if I won the lottery. And in the past, I've had a hard time with this one, although I'm really kind of partial to the story of Mary Leonard, the first attorney in the state. But maybe that's a story for another time, as a famous person once said. From now on, basically, it's this story. This is my favorite one. And buckle up, because this is a little bit complicated. It starts in a mud flat near Cordoba, Alaska, and then it flashes back to the old Portland waterfront during the Shanghaiing era. And from there, it goes to the University of Oregon in Eugene and around the turn of the century, and then to Versailles in 1918, as in the Treaty of Versailles, the League of Nations in 1933, Pearl Harbor in 1941, and yeah, Hiroshima in 1945. Along the way, there's industrial scale opium smuggling. Bunko Kelly is involved. If you know who that is, you know this has got to be good.
Yep.
There are connections to the Klondike Gold Rush, the president of the Oregon Republican Party in the 1890s, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. So yeah, let's get on with that. Starting with that mud flat in Alaska. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I got visuals for this one.
Ooh.
Boom, there it is.
Oh, that's perfect. It shows it minimizes us up top and actually shows. Oh, that's great.
Oh, cool. Okay. Well, hopefully let me know if it doesn't work for any reason, because I can definitely I can roll with that. But nearly 50 years ago, the Good Friday earthquake changed Alaska forever. And it killed 9 people, and it slammed the west coast with tsunamis. It killed 122 more, including 4 in Oregon, actually. But it did something else too. It heaved up the seafloor of the Inside Passage near the ghost town of Catalia by about 12 feet. And in the process, it brought something to the surface that was a very important piece of the history of Alaska. And or earlier, of Oregon, and it was a small wooden-hulled steamship. Most of the wood had been eaten away, but the steam engine and other hard parts were still there, just, sticking up out of the mud. The wrecked ship turned out to be the remains of the SS Portland, the most famous steamer in Alaskan history. And this was the ship that kicked off the Klondike Gold Rush when it arrived in Seattle in 1897 with the ton of gold on board. Now, okay, so here's what it looks like, what it looked like as it was sinking.
Okay.
The Portland was almost like the mascot of the Klondike Gold Rush. So Alaskan history buffs were very excited about this find. But Alaska wasn't the only state with a cause for celebration, because the Portland was a big deal in Oregon's history, too. In Oregon, it was infamous, though, rather than famous, because before the ship was renamed the SS Portland, it was the SS Haitian Republic, spelled funny with Haytian instead of, Haitian. It was based out of Portland, and it was probably the most notorious opium smuggling ship on the West Coast. It was operated by a group of idiots whose clumsiness and ineptitude was like something out of the Keystone Cops. So its name was in the newspapers all the time. Every reader in Portland knew that ship and knew the names of its owners. The senior partner in the operation was a 40-something man named William Dunbar, and he was a sort of low-key Portland VIP. Dunbar, a native of Scotland, had come to Oregon in the 1870s or 1880s or so, and set up the Turner flouring mills. Looking for markets for his flour and the wheat he had contracts for, he discovered buyers in China that really liked the quality of the Oregon-grown wheat and flour, which they make cakes and noodles of various types with, soft white wheat. China today is a major buyer of Oregon's soft white wheat, and Dunbar was the merchant who first opened that door. And it made him very wealthy. Dunbar was soon making enough money to set up his own shipping company, which he called Merchant Steamship Company, with a fleet of 2 steamships. And he used the steamers, the Haitian Republic and one other one called the SS Wilmington, to expand beyond the grain freight business into the wholesale grocery business. And he built a warehouse and a wharf on the Willamette River just south of the Burnside Bridge on the west side. The steamships were based out of there. And by the end of the 1800s, Dunbar was one of the most respected and influential members of Oregon's business community and a member of the Arlington Club. But it's not clear what happened to push Dunbar over the edge into industrial-scale criminal enterprise. But something did. It may have been the death of his wife. It may also have been the influence of Nat Blum, a flamboyant cigar store owner who was his junior partner in the steamship company. Or maybe he just hated waste. I mean, he was Scottish after all, and nobody in Portland was buying shiploads of Chinese goods. Every time one of his steamships left Portland, it was loaded with grain bound for buyers in China, but it came back in ballast. So we can imagine him thinking about this. What cargo could I bring back from China to Portland on the return voyages after bringing wheat from Portland to China? And we can kind of imagine him realizing that were two cargoes that would maybe fit the bill: people and opium. Now, both of these things were equally illegal, but the people would be the safer of the two cargoes. The Chinese Exclusion Act had been passed in 1882, slamming the door shut on Chinese laborers who wanted to come to America to work, but plenty of Chinese people still wanted to come to America, and in those pre-driver's license years, once you were here, nobody would be able to tell you, that you were in the country illegally. All you needed was a well-connected, sympathetic smuggler to bring you across the sea and either provide forged entry papers or sneak you ashore in the middle of the night. And that was a thing that William Dunbar could do. And then there was the opium. In the 1890s, opium was still perfectly legal, but it was subject to a very heavy tax, $12 a pound, which is about $375 in modern money. And that on a product that today sells on the international market for less than $50 a pound, you can see that would make it worthwhile to, dodge the tax man. The thing was, though, the vast majority of Americans viewed opium smoking as the worst kind of debauchery and trashiness. Most of the population, if they learned you were smuggling Chinese workers into the country, wouldn't much care. But most Americans would, if they learned you were smuggling in opium, rat you out to the police in a heartbeat. So, the risks in opium smuggling were a lot higher. Although, obviously, it was more compact and easier to sneak around with. But Blum and Dunbar were apparently willing to take those risks because obviously if you're buying a product for $50 a pound that's selling on the streets for, $500 a pound, you can make pretty good money until you get caught. And yeah, Blum and Dunbar were definitely going to get caught sooner or later. One of the really striking aspects of their story is the contrast between the size and scale of their organization and the clumsiness of their operations. Usually smugglers this dumb don't grow this big. But of course, usually successful businessmen don't jeopardize their success by taking up high-risk criminal enterprises as a side hustle either. Now, according to Blum's later testimony in court, the criminal stuff got started circa 1890 after one of Dunbar's friends and fellow members of the Portland business elite, James Lotan, was given a cushy sinecure job as chief customs collector for the Port of Portland. Now, Lotan was the owner of the Stark Street Ferry. He was also the head of the Oregon Republican Party, and this easy, lucrative federal job was basically a patronage plum. The chief customs collector was the top federal official in charge of making sure that no one was smuggling anything into the port. Obviously, if you're in charge of making sure nobody is smuggling anything, you're in a pretty good position to, be smuggling stuff. CF Portland Police Bureau, circa 1925. Or, as was the case here, was to set some friends up to do it and rake off a cut. Dunbar and Blum were probably doing some low-key smuggling before this, because immediately upon receiving the new appointment, Lotan, and again, this is according to Blum, approached Blum to see about putting this newfound authority to use, and the scheme they came up with was pretty slick. Lotan would generate official paperwork for each Chinese passenger. Each passenger would pay $120, which is about $3,750 in modern money, to be smuggled into the country, and the paperwork would identify the Chinese men as employees of U.S. companies, already legal residents who had been sent to Canada on business and now just needed to get back home to the U.S. The passengers would board the Haitian Republic or the Wilmington in Hong Kong, and by the way, this is I think this is the Haitian Republic under steam, and the ship would carry them to Canada and land in Victoria or Vancouver. And there they would finalize the papers with, photographs and anything else they needed before getting back on the ship and heading south to Portland. And upon arriving, they would be ushered in to see Lotan, or one of his trusted flunkies, who would ask them a series of questions designed to appear to confirm that the workers were entitled to quote-unquote return to America. These interview questions were carefully scripted, and during the voyage, Chinese-speaking associates of Blum and Dunbar would, instruct each worker carefully on how to answer them when they arrived. So, yeah, this was how they had started out the operations, and it was a slick system. And if they'd stuck to it rather than diversifying into drug smuggling, they probably would have been able to keep it up for a long time. But of course they did not. And maybe the gang was smuggling opium all along, but I don't think they were. From looking at this, the astonishing rate at which opium-related disasters started piling up after mid-1892 suggests to me that before that they were only smuggling people, which they had, like I said, down to a science. But smuggling opium was not only much more lucrative than smuggling people, it was also much more space efficient. The steamers were making the trips anyway. An extra half-ton of opium wouldn't make much difference and would add the modern equivalent of $500,000 to the profit on the journey. So, great. But to make it work, the opium had to be off the ship before it tied up in port. And that was probably the number one difference, the number one reason why opium was so much more dangerous to smuggle than people. So the opium, packed in watertight barrels, would be rolled off the back of the steamship in a quiet, lonely part of the Columbia River as the ship steamed past, and retrieved by, one of the members of the gang in rented steam launches or skiffs. Let's see, is that... Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, right. This is an illustration from the West Shore of Chinese workers being smuggled into the country the old-fashioned way, not on a steamship. Anyway, yeah. So what they would do is they would pack the opium into watertight barrels, roll it off the back of the steamship in a quiet, lonely part of the Columbia River as the steamship passed. As the ship steamed past and retrieved by gang members in rented steam launches, which might seem like a pretty good arrangement. But for Blum and Dunbar, the problem was they couldn't just run down to Kelly Temporary Services and hire a couple guys for a day to fish smuggled opium out of the river. The only people they could trust with an operation like this were actual members of Portland's criminal underworld, like Robert Garthorne, Thomas Berg, and Joseph Bunko Kelly, the sailors' boarding house runners and Shanghaiers and low-level drug smugglers of Portland, and they all turned out to be pretty bad at their jobs. Barrels of opium were getting away from the gang as early as July 1892, when Garthorne, up in Canada, loaded 300 pounds of opium on the Wilmington and returned to Portland by rail. Back in town, he met up with Berg and went to the spot near St. John's where the Wilmington was supposed to make the dope drop sometime between midnight and dawn the next day. But the Wilmington was delayed arriving. So Garthorne and Berg waited all night, then gave up, went back to Portland, and went to bed or something. But a few hours later, in the dim morning light, the Wilmington steamed by the rendezvous point and rolled the barrels off the back and on to port. So when the Wilmington arrived at the Dunbar produce wharf, Blum and Dunbar learned what had happened, and Blum seemed to have been the opium guy. I think Dunbar was the people smuggler, and Blum was the opium smuggler. Leaped into panicky action, grabbing another gang member, raced to St. John's to rent a steam launch that picked up Garthorne on the way, and they found two of the barrels pretty easily. The third one, though, they found that a guy had found it and brought it to shore and put it up on an old dock and opened it up. The guy's name was J.L. Caples, an old riverboat pilot, and he had opened up this barrel, and he couldn't help but notice that it was full of little itty-bitty cans with like spam cans, only tiny, with Chinese characters printed all over them. And he thought, well, this sure looks like opium to me. So when these guys came up to him, Garthorne had an old brass star so that he could impersonate a customs official. Thanked him for picking up the barrel and offered him $1 for his trouble. He's like, oh, I don't think so. I'd like $50, please. And so Blum accepted immediately, but he didn't have $50 on him. He only had $10. So Caples took the $10 and an IOU and was told that he could stop by Dunbar Produce and Grocery at 552 Front Street later in the day. There'd be $40 waiting for him. So yeah, if he had any idea who was, any doubts as to who was doing the smuggling in Portland, that would have laid them to rest right there. A few months later, disaster struck again, and it really was disaster this time. The Wilmington was on its way into port with another 450 pounds of opium, but someone had gotten suspicious when it was loaded on board in Vancouver and tipped off the feds. So Dunbar learned about this while the steamer was en route, and so he hastily sent Garthorne with Bunko Kelly to Astoria to intercept the ship before they pulled into, the port in Astoria, warn them they should dump the opium somewhere right away. Unfortunately, as they approached the Wilmington in their rented launch, they saw a federal revenue cutter was already there, which had stopped and rendezvoused with the Wilmington right after it crossed the bar. And it put into port in Astoria, opium and all, and that was how the Blum Dunbar gang lost the Wilmington. It was seized by the federal government along with its load of opium. So now they just had one steamship, the Haitian Republic. Okay, now we're going to get to the part about Pearl Harbor, because it was around this time, or shortly thereafter, that Dunbar informally adopted a young, spunky Japanese teenager to be a companion for his son Lambert, who, like Dr. Benton Quest did with Haji in the old Johnny Quest cartoons. There's that, if anybody remembers those. This young lad's name was Yosuke Matsuoka, but he went by the nickname of Frank among his native English speaker friends. We will have lots more about Frank in just a little bit here. Another several months later, on September 2nd, smugglers brought in a big shipment on the Haitian Republic, 1,400 pounds of opium. Garthorne and Berg took charge of it, hauled it off to Berg's house, where they planned to stage it for later distribution. But there was a big problem. It seemed that a day or two earlier, Mr. Berg's wife had gotten into a fight with one of the neighbors. And the neighbor, who clearly suspected that something criminal was going on, started keeping an eagle eye on the Berg home. As soon as she saw this big flurry of late-night activity, she picked up the telephone, which very few people had in 1892, but she had one, and got her revenge by calling the cops. And the timing just couldn't have been worse. There was already more than half a ton of opium in the house, in addition to the new stuff being unloaded. But the police call seems to have been intercepted or fielded by a policeman friend of Nat Blum's, because instead of the police responding to the scene, Nat himself appeared and introduced himself as a police detective. So Detective Blum was taking her statement, and the two of them were watching Garthorne and Berg through the window as they hauled the opium out of Berg's house and wheeled it down the street on a cart, right, getting away with the goods. And Blum was like, yeah, don't worry about it. They're walking right into a trap. We got a squad of cops raiding right down the road to pounce. So she kept her mouth shut and watched them leave. And then Blum thanked her and left and, helped them stash it in the house. And maybe he was too busy congratulating himself on this smooth play to realize that it meant the house was kind of not a safe place to stash contraband anymore. That would prove to be an expensive oversight a couple months later when another 1,400 pounds came in, which they packed 600 pounds of into steamer trunks and, took them off to San Francisco to contacts in Chinatown there. One of the three mules got busted on arrival, so there went 200 pounds of the goods. And when they got back to Portland, they found worse news waiting. The remaining 800 pounds of opium had been stolen from Berg's house. And it's very tempting to wonder if the neighbor lady had something to do with that. Anyway, as you will have gathered, in all the gang lost at least half a ton of opium in official seizures, at least twice that in thefts, and also they managed to lose a $30,000 steamer. back when $30,000 was a lot of money. So regardless of how lucrative the opium smuggling was, it's hard to imagine how this could have possibly all penciled out. And as you will have gathered, it did not take brilliant detective work to figure out what was going on at Dunbar Produce and Grocery. By November of 1893, word of what they were up to had been filtering up from the waterfront for at least a year and a half. So in late 1894, a grand jury returned indictments against 15 people, including Blum, Dunbar, and Lotan, the head of the Oregon Republican Party, remember, on charges that involved smuggling more than 2 tons of opium and running a human trafficking operation, smuggling thousands of undocumented Chinese laborers into Portland. Well, this trial kept the city talking, and but Lotan and his co-defendants didn't have a whole lot to worry about because the roster of court officers reads like an excerpt from the Arlington Club directory. The foreman of the jury, Charles Ladd, was a close friend of James Lotan, so the trial ended with a hung jury, and the word on the street was that the vote was 11-1. Charles Ladd had refused to vote to convict his friend, so they'd have to do a new trial. And there were a total of 3 trials for the accused smugglers. The thing got dragged into 1895, but the public and the newspaper reporters got increasingly tired of the whole thing. And a few of the defendants pleaded guilty and ended up being convicted. But the more Portland saw these guys on the stand, the less credible their testimony got. So Lotan actually never did get convicted. But there was one exception to this pattern, which was this, that the government had the goods on William Dunbar, and he knew it. He'd gotten off on the coattails of Lotan in the first trial, but there would have been nothing any lawyer or influential friend would be able to do for him at the next one. So he left for Hong Kong shortly after the first trial on what he claimed was a business trip and stayed there. 20 years later, in 1913, President Wilson pardoned him and he was able to come home. And a few months after the first trial, the Wilmington burned to the waterline and sank in the river. Several months after that, the Haitian Republic was bought up by the Seattle operators and renamed the SS Portland. So that's the story of what I like to refer to as the world's dumbest drug smugglers. And now it's time to shift our attention away from them and onto Frank Matsuoka, the young Japanese lad that William Dunbar adopted as companion for his son Lambert. I mentioned earlier on that Dunbar brought basically a wide-awake Japanese boy into his home as a sort of a foster son, as a companion for his son Lambert Dunbar, a Haji from Johnny Quest kind of thing. That Japanese boy, Yosuke Matsuoka, went by Frank when he was in Portland, and I want to back up for a little bit and get Frank's story from the beginning. Yosuke Matsuoka was born in 1880 in the village of Morotsumi in the Yamaguchi Prefecture in Japan. He was the son of a local shipping company owner, but when he was very young, his father's business collapsed into bankruptcy after one of his ships sank, and his father died within a few years, a broken man. So he spent most of his preteen years with his widowed mother in proud poverty. In 1891, Matsuoka's mother agreed to let him venture overseas to do what he could to restore the family fortunes. So February 23rd, 1893, following some crash course English instruction, Matsuoka boarded the steamship Tacoma in Kobe, bound for Victoria, BC. And about a month after he arrived, Matsuoka joined the Dunbar household. Now remember, Dunbar was in the business of smuggling people into the country, which he did by staging them at Vancouver or Victoria, furnishing them with forged documents, and presenting them as American residents returning from business travel. So this may actually be how Matsuoka got to Portland, although later in life he was always happy to talk about his stormy, miserable voyage from Kobe on the Tacoma. He never spoke much about his last leg of the journey from British Columbia to Portland. And most biographers have tended to assume it was a simple, yes, he has biographers. The guy was quite famous. At one point, the most famous University of Oregon graduate worldwide. But most of his biographers have sort of assumed it was just a simple, boring railroad journey. But if he actually was smuggled illegally into the country by Dunbar's crew, he certainly wouldn't have wanted to talk about that in later years after he'd grown up and become an important diplomat. which happened. But whether he was part of that or not, this was the family business that Matsuoka joined as a 12-year-old boy. And the household consisted of Dunbar, his 13-year-old son Lambert, and his widowed sister Isabel Beveridge. Matsuoka joined the family, like I said, as a sort of foster brother and companion for Lambert. And Mrs. Beveridge took a particular interest in the young Japanese boy and spent countless hours with him working on his English pronunciation and helping him and Lambert with their schoolwork. And if you ever are listening to audio from the League of Nations when the Japanese delegation stood up and walked out, you will hear someone in the Japanese delegation speaking with a Scottish accent, English with a Scottish accent. That's Yosuke Matsuoka. So yeah, back to our story. At the end of that year, the whole trial thing happened and Dunbar went into exile, but Matsuoka stayed with the family. In 1898, he enrolled at the University of Oregon for an undergraduate degree in law. And after graduating, he spent some time trying to get admitted to an Ivy League graduate school back east, and if he'd been left to his own devices, he probably would have. But back in Japan, his mother's health was declining fast, so he decided in 1902 to return to his native land. When he returned to Japan, Yosuke Matsuoka was 22 years old, had lived in Oregon and briefly California for almost half of his life. His Oregon years had been happy ones, and he would remember them fondly for the rest of his life. And Oregon would remember him fondly, too. Within 25 years of his graduation, he would be probably the most famous University of Oregon alumnus in the world. And after December 7th, 1941, the most infamous. All of that, of course, was in the future. Just now, back in Japan, Matsuoka was not finding his hard-earned U of O degree very useful. Japanese universities wouldn't recognize it. So that meant he could forget about grad school at Tokyo Imperial University, so he took a foreign service exam instead and launched a career as a diplomat. As a diplomat, Matsuoka was excellent. His natural gift of gab had been nurtured and shaped in the boisterous, outgoing style of frontier Oregon, and he'd worked in a newspaper office in Oakland, California for long enough to get to know, work well with reporters. He could be garrulous and gaffe-prone, but he was generous with his time and was obviously brilliant and was very good at the political games that always come with diplomatic organizations. So he rose quickly through the ranks, and after the First World War, I've forgotten my visuals. This is, here we have William Dunbar in the bottom of this one. Nat Blum, the cigar store owner guy who kind of specialized in opium, is on the right. The other two are a judge and an inspector. Okay, so back to our thing. So for many years after this, I gotta go find my place in my notes. Yeah, after the First World War, he was in the Japanese delegation to the Versailles Peace Conference, and for many years after that, he served as an executive in the South Manchurian Railway Company, which was a Japanese-owned railroad cutting through Chinese territory, which Japan had seized from Tsarist Russia in the Russo-Japanese War. Excuse me. Then in 1931 came the Manchuria incident, in which a cabal of Japanese army officers, junior officers, blew up some dynamite near a South Manchuria railway line and blamed the Chinese for it and used it as a pretext to invade and occupy Manchuria and set up the puppet state of Manchukuo there. Faced with this fait accompli and wanting, of course, to keep the conquered territory, the Japanese government backed the officers up, the League of Nations objected, and Matsuoka, who by now was a widely internationally known diplomat, was assigned to the League to handle the fallout. Matsuoka was bitterly opposed to the idea of Japan withdrawing from the League of Nations and tried very hard to prevent it, but ironically enough, it was he that led the Japanese delegation in their dramatic walkout on February 24th, 1933. So on the way back to Japan, Matsuoka worried about what his reception might be. After all, diplomacy had failed and Japan had withdrawn from the League of Nations. As a businessman, he knew what a bad thing that was. Internationally, it was a bad look. It made Japan look like a rogue state. But when he got home, he was welcomed as a hero. The pageantry of the Japanese delegation's dramatic exit, heads held high and solemn dignity had really appealed to the populace. Matsuoka was at that moment the most popular man in Japan other than the actual emperor. But all was not as peachy as it might have looked, because he had no family networks to support him, so he had to look for support where he could find it, and the business elites that would ordinarily be with him were furious about Japan's withdrawing from the League of Nations. It may have been an important point of national honor, but it was going to cost them a lot of money, because Japan was now basically an international pariah. But the population of laborers and farm workers loved him, so Matsuoka took the path of William Jennings Bryan, who he once met in California, and stepped into the role of a populist politician. The idea was to build a fascist-style grassroots organization similar to the one Mussolini had developed in Italy. But after 2 years of barnstorming around the country giving populist speeches, he realized he wasn't going to be able to get enough traction to build the mass support he needed, so he went back to South Manchuria and took back on the railroad. But then in 1940, the prime minister tapped him to be foreign minister. Now, this was theoretically the number 2 job in the imperial Japanese government. Matsuoka was only foreign minister for a year, but it was an extraordinarily action-packed year. From the start, his goal was to forge an official alliance with Nazi Germany. He was convinced that only as a partner with Germany could Japan negotiate on an equal footing with its greatest rival, which of course is the good old USA. And he hoped that that treaty could be spun as a failure for the Roosevelt administration, causing Roosevelt to lose the 1940 election. Matsuoka had given up ever being able to do business with Roosevelt's people. They were too intransigently opposed to Japan continuing to occupy Manchuria, which he considered an indispensable lifeline of raw materials for, Japan, which is an island empire. A new administration under Wendell Willkie might be eager to break from the old regime, and maybe with the right kind of diplomacy, it could be brought around to Japan's way of thinking. And then, the U.S. could broker a peace with honor deal for both Japan and China. Both countries had been bogged down in a shooting war in stalemate in Manchuria for half a decade, and then everybody could settle down again. Here's the problem. Matsuoka thought he understood America, when in fact what he understood was the rough and tumble waterfront districts and lumber camps of 1890s Portland. He thought of Americans as a bluff, straightforward bunch who despised weakness but respected guts and strength, and he also thought of them as being not too hung up on things like anti-smuggling laws. The sheer audacity of the Dunbar gang's opium operations had commanded some respect in Portland, so Matsuoka naturally kind of thought Americans would respond similarly, with audacity played out on the international stage. The problem is, America in 1940 was completely unlike waterfront Portland in 1893. Matsuoka was a living anachronism, and his confidence in his understanding of the country he spent his teenage years in was about to bite him and his country really hard. So when he accepted his appointment as Imperial Japan's foreign minister, it was the fulfillment of a dream for him. This gregarious 13-year-old boy who'd been informally adopted into Portland opium smugglers' household back in 1893 come a long way in 47 years. And it should have been a triumphal time for him. It did have its moments, but Matsuoka's year in the chair as Japan's top diplomat was a real pivot point in his life. The mistakes he made as foreign minister, crucial strategic mistakes that came disguised as big foreign policy wins, would define him and his legacy forever, and not in a good way either. The first of these, and by far the biggest, was the pact with Nazi Germany, the Tripartite Pact, which was officially signed on September 19, 1940, bringing Japan officially into the Axis. Germany was now, thanks to Matsuoka, an ally of Nazi Germany. And this was his project. It was not like this was the thing that he spearheaded. This really was, he was like, this is the solution. But now, instead of respecting Japan's resolve and working to defuse tensions to prevent getting drawn into a two-front war, the Americans got alarmed, sensing that they were being closed in on. So instead of sending Roosevelt packing as punishment for allowing this setback to occur, they rallied around him and started getting ready for a fight. Instead of making it harder for Roosevelt to sell war to the American public, the pact made it easier. There was something else that Matsuoka did too. that he soon regretted bitterly, although it was one of the most signal diplomatic masterstrokes of his career. In and here he is. This is Yosuke Matsuoka. In April of 1941, while visiting Hitler in Berlin, he induced Hitler to do a little bragging and get carried away a little bit, talking about what Germany might do in a war against the U.S. Here, by the way, is Matsuoka with Benito Mussolini. That's Benito Mussolini there on the right, across that like Vladimir Putin-sized table there. And then here he is with a couple of Nazis who actually were executed in the Nuremberg trials. I don't remember their names. Here he is on the front cover of Time magazine. Because that happened too. Little Portland kid. Anyway, so he got Hitler to start talking about what Germany might do in a war with the U.S. And Hitler said, and I'm going to use my bad German accent for this because you're quoting Hitler, you got to do that, right? Germany would wage a vigorous war against America with U-boats and the Luftwaffe, and with her greater experience, this would be more than a match for America. And that's when he said it. If Japan gets into conflict with the United States, Germany on her part will take the necessary steps at once. And with that, Japan had the personal pledge of the head of the German state that if war came, they would be backed up. That was a sword that cut two ways, though. It also turned Japan into a tripwire that the Roosevelt administration could tug on to bring their reluctant country to the aid of the beleaguered British. Now, as far as I know, there isn't any direct evidence that Roosevelt's people started tugging on that tripwire, but given the circumstances, it would be contrary to the human nature and the nature of diplomacy if they did not. Matsuoka clearly thought they were doing that in the months that followed. Well, Matsuoka's tenure as foreign minister ended 3 months later in July 1941. He was convinced the U.S. was trying to bait Japan into war, and he'd become something of a loose cannon, and had lost the confidence of the actual ruler of the country, which was Army Minister General Hideki Tojo. The story of Japan getting into World War II involved the army essentially seizing control and running the country, and the civilian government was basically just sidelined, and it more or less became official in July 1941 when Tojo took over the government, dissolved the cabinet, and reformed it without Matsuoka in it. The government that Matsuoka was in lasted only a few months after that. Tensions with the United States got worse and worse. Tojo got more and more bellicose, and finally, in October, Prince Konoe, who was the prime minister, took the hint and resigned, and was replaced with Tojo. And Tojo took the country straight to war, taking special care to make sure the Nazis would back Japan up, as their Fuhrer personally promised to do. And they did. And this is the answer to one of the most weirdest things that people who study World War II talk about. Is like, why on earth did Hitler declare war on the United States after Pearl Harbor? Like, the U.S. declares war on Japan. Why did Hitler turn around and declare war on the United States? It was an incredibly stupid thing to do, but he did it immediately. Well, I would suggest that there's a very strong possibility of this because our boy Frank Matsuoka got his personal pledge in public that he would, and so he did, in spite of the fact that it basically doomed his enterprise in the process. On the morning of the Pearl Harbor attack, Matsuoka heard the news on the radio like everybody else, and initially he was exhilarated, but a day later the situation had sunk in a bit, and he was a little morose. And he told a visitor, he said, "The Tripartite Pact was my worst mistake. I had hoped to prevent the United States from entering the war." Well, Matsuoka spent the war years struggling with tuberculosis, which would shortly kill him. But by that time, 2 nuclear bombs had been detonated on Japanese soil, and at that point he was in obvious decline, but had not given up. Despite the bleak outlook for his country, he got involved with a plan to form an underground resistance government. believing that the remains of the Japanese army could hold out for 10 years on a guerrilla basis. He admitted, yeah, okay, America's got all the strength, but not the patience. And this is a line that you will sometimes hear from modern dictators too, like Vladimir Putin. Oh yeah, the West will sooner or later give up and stop supporting Ukraine. We just have to hold out a little longer. He said that a, quote, third-rate politician like President Truman would not be able to inspire his rabble-y democratic masses to put up with the 10-year struggle to subdue Japan, so they would win by attrition. Of course, there might be a few more nuclear bombings in the meantime, but eggs, omelets. But it was not to be. The emperor, when he got wind of this plan, he was like, nope, no, we're not doing that. No, he finally found his voice, and the war with Japan ended with Japan flat on its back, and the Matsuoka nearly on his deathbed. He finally died of tuberculosis at age 66 in June of 1946, while in prison waiting trial on war crimes charges. The interesting thing is, Yosuke Matsuoka was a product of his time, but more than that, he was a product of another time and another place, the late 19th century in one of the roughest, least refined parts of the American frontier, the Shanghaiing era Portland waterfront. And it really showed. Just after the war's end, a Japanese reporter asked him what Americans were like. And this was his response. He said, "Now, assuming that you are walking on a small path in a field, which is so narrow that only one person can pass through, and an American comes from the opposite direction, you are facing each other and neither side is willing to yield his right of way. Soon becoming impatient, the American will clench his fist and sock you in the jaw. Taken by surprise, you may lower your head and let him pass. Next time you meet him on the same path, he will simply raise his fist. He considers that the best solution. On the other hand," he continued, "if you do not retreat the first time and engage in a counterattack, the American will be shocked and take another look at you. Well, this fellow knows what he is doing. So recognizing he will become your best friend." Well, responding to this quote, David Liu, who is Matsuoka's biographer, writes, "This was the America of cowboys and confrontations at high noon, and of the Wild West. And this image of the bygone era acquired in the still underdeveloped Pacific Northwest was to govern Matsuoka's thinking when he negotiated with the United States. And as evidenced by the fact that he was still thinking this way in 1945, after it was all over with his punch the cowboy and he will become your pal strategy had failed again and again and again, he never really learned this lesson. But yet, is it possible that in a way the crafty old diplomat was actually right? I mean, certainly not in his own lifetime, but in ours. Japan has become many Americans' favorite foreign country. It's not my personal favorite foreign country, that's Canada, but Japan is probably number 3, maybe 4 behind the United Kingdom. I'm not alone. According to Gallup's annual World Affairs poll, 82% of Americans regard Japan mostly favorably or very favorably, which puts it in 4th place behind France, Great Britain, and Canada. So as the rawness of the wounds of the war has faded to a memory, a certain admiration and respect for an uncommonly gutsy old adversary remains. In fact, the relationship between Japan and the U.S. today actually seems pretty analogous to that cowboy and his new best friend sitting side by side at the bar in an Old West saloon, each with a black eye and a bloody nose, having a beer together. There's something else about Matsuoka was long-term right about too, and this is where the story actually gets a little spooky. It was a famous speech that he gave in Geneva in 1931 as the League of Nations debated what to do about the Manchuria incident, that false flag dynamite attack and invasion by rogue Japanese army officers. Matsuoka stood there before the world on that day, and this is what he said. And I would do a Scottish accent for him if I knew how to do one, but I don't, so I won't. He said, "Humanity crucified Jesus of Nazareth 2,000 years ago. And today, can any of you assure me that the so-called world opinion can make no mistake? We Japanese feel that we are now put on trial. Some of the people in Europe and America may even wish to crucify Japan in the 20th century. Gentlemen, Japan stands ready to be crucified. But we do believe, and firmly believe, that in a very few years world opinion will be changed, and that we also shall be understood by the world as Jesus of Nazareth was. Well, this speech was not well received, especially by serious Christians who felt it was borderline blasphemy, if not worse. But in Japan, it was a sensation. Translations got printed and distributed. The speech was used in schools, English language programs alongside Shakespeare, and a phonograph record was made of the speech and sold in shops. And again, looking back on that speech from 1945, it must have looked like there was a lot of hot air, liberally spiced with bitter irony. Japan had been crucified indeed on a cross of uranium. And for what? Well, but by 1962, it actually made some sense. In fact, if someone had brought it to Nikita Khrushchev's attention during the Cuban Missile Crisis after he made the conscious decision to risk being ousted as leader of the Soviet Union by reaching past the big red button on his desk and picking up the big red phone instead, a decision that has to have been influenced by the spectacle of Japan's burning cities, radiation-ravaged people, and gut-wrenching journalism by John Hersey in his eyewitness account of Hiroshima after the bomb. Maybe Khrushchev would have understood and agreed with Matsuoka's sentiment. Cross of uranium. Anyway, it is entirely possible, if not likely, that Japan's nuclear sacrifice saved the world from nuclear holocaust 17 years later. The argument goes like this. Hiroshima becomes a sacrificial lamb on that day. A few days later, Nagasaki becomes another, giving the world a small taste of what nuclear holocaust might look like in the era of multi-megaton hydrogen bombs. After seeing the film footage and reading the eyewitness accounts, no one would ever be able to think of nuclear war in purely abstract terms again. No one would ever be able to hold national pride in one hand and thermonuclear war in the other and think for one red-hot second that they were of similar value. And that is a gift that the whole world received in 1945, paid for in full with the blood of Japanese innocents. The gift they bequeathed us was a visceral demonstration of why such weapons must never be used again. And we may never know if we owe those innocents our own lives, but it seems awfully likely to me. So maybe, just maybe, we would all be dead today and our beautiful planet would be a scarred and smoking cinder if it hadn't been for an incompetent drug smuggler on the old Shanghai-era Portland waterfront taking an orphan boy into his household 130 years ago. And if that's not the butterfly effect, I'd love to know what is.
Yes. I love that story. I've heard it before. I've heard bits and pieces. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and email Netflix.
It's my favorite. I could not, you know how you have like, you take like an imprint, you can like see where you were when something huge happened. I took one of those like screenshots of the book that I was reading when I was looking up Matsuoka and saw the name Dunbar. I was like, no, it can't possibly be. But yeah, that was
Yeah.
the guy.
Yeah, it's a really cool story. I love it so much. And yeah, it should be a movie. It's got so much. I mean, we sat here for, well, not quite
Way
an hour,
too
but
long. My gosh. I did not realize it was going to eat up this much time.
no, that's fine. It was a joy to listen to for us, and I know obviously all of our fans. I don't know if that's the accurate term.
Hapless victims.
Was victims. But yes, I actually have. I don't know if it's. I started thinking about it when I heard the story, or I had the thought before, but it certainly d- is shouldn't be lost on people that yeah, when that happened, it demonstrated to the world what this horrible power is and what it could do to resources. And that's I'm not gonna say, Fallout the video game is never going to happen, but it just to a lot of people or to a lot of dictators specifically, as crazy as they can be, it doesn't make sense to resource deny. You're better off just massing an invasion, going in and taking the resource. It makes no sense to drop warheads. So I'm not gonna,
Especially not if you're downwind.
yeah. Like I said, I'm not going to say that we're all 100% safe, but I mean it should bring a little bit of comfort.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I don't know. I don't know what to say. It's my favorite story.
Are you ever gonna write it as a book? Is
I
that gonna be a project for you?
I think I might have it in one of the books. Like I can't remember, but
Okay.
yeah, I definitely have to do something like that with it. The other one that I really want to do, I really want to dig in and do a proper biography of Mary Leonard. And I'll talk about her another time, but she was the first female attorney in Oregon and Washington. And yeah, I can't give you a thumbnail of her story and what's so amazing about it, but it's another one that I think the history people in the middle of the last century got wrong because I'm pretty sure she died of syphilis that was given to her by her husband that she moved to Oregon to marry and who she was accused of having shot. And God, I hope she did because he had it coming if anyone ever did.
What's
Daniel
that song
Leonard,
from Chicago? He had it coming.
but
He had it coming.
I don't think she did though. I think somebody else. He was not a nice man.
No.
But I'm pretty sure he gave her syphilis because she died crazy in her late 50s, 20 or 30 years later. And that craziness has been what historians noticed about her story. But there's more to it. And I would love to dig into that. But anyway, I've blabbed long enough about this stuff.
Well, that'll be our next stories from the state. Honestly, I really enjoy doing these. I hope everybody watching or listening enjoys them too. It's a way for us to bring stories from what we've already done, kind of to a more formal discussion. I mean, obviously, we didn't quite get to have time enough to discuss today, but that's okay. It is a fantastic story, and it's definitely worth telling and retelling over and over again. And besides, we're not gonna, like I said, we're not gonna be here next week, so you won't hear from us
Yeah.
for another 2 weeks. So we'll see
Yeah.
what
Savor
happens
the flavor, everybody.
then. David, do you have any final thoughts?
I do not. That was a great story, Finn. I was quite literally hanging on every word.
Wow,
Well,
thanks,
well
David.
done.
Yeah, it was so good. All right,
Well,
guys.
it's material that is inspirational enough that it's, it just it's one of those stories that kind of tells itself.
I'm not kidding. I may email some people and see what I bite on. I did that today because the wife started playing Life is Strange, and I've already played through Life is Strange 1, and I think most of all of 2. And Don't Nod is a great company, and Life is Strange is such an incredible game, and a lot of it is not in a real Oregon town because Arcadia City. There's an Arcadia Bay, I believe, but there's no Arcadia City. But a lot of the stuff is inspired by Garibaldi and Tillamook and all this stuff. So I actually reached out to the studio and I'm like, hey, we're the Oregon Voices Network. I'm one of the founders. We got this show that I'd really love to get somebody on to talk about all that because it is a strictly Oregon game. So I'd love to get their thoughts on it. So we'll see.
Yeah, right on.
Alrighty, guys, thank you so much for joining us. This episode was brought to you by the Oregon Voices Network, a historical podcast network that brings you amazing shows like Welcome to Oregon, a Oregon history and lore podcast, Offbeat Oregon, and the Penny Dreadful radio show. I need to start going through and redoing everything. Our website is now updated to reflect all of these wonderful shows. So if you want one source for all of our content, social links like our Facebook group, page, and Discord, occasional articles, a store supplied by local artists, which I need to check on, come to think of it, and more, check out www.oregonvoices.net. Also, If you love our work, you should seriously consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/Oregon Voices Network. The money goes towards all of our projects and helps us pay for things like software, assets, and more. If you are listening to the audio version of the show, you can find more of our work on YouTube at youtube.com/Oregon Voices Network. Gentlemen, where can people find you and your works?
You can find me on pretty much any social media platform at the Spirit of PDX. And if you would like to interact with us and other fans of the show, please consider joining our Facebook group, the Oregon Voices Network, and our Discord group of the same name.
Yeah, and you'll find me on hanging out in the Discord group too, and occasionally bouncing off the Facebook group. Or you can reach out to me directly at finn@pulp-lit.com.
Yay. Alrighty, guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. From myself and the crew, later. And have a great 4th of July. Have a safe one. Don't blow fingers off.
Yeah.
Or do. Could be fun.
Bye.
If you do, save them and bring them to the ER. They may be able to reattach them.
Send them to us in a jar.
That took a dark turn.
Sorry.
Okay. Bye, guys.
Bye.